At around noon on May 13, 1903, around the town of Kelmis, nestled between Belgium, Germany, and France, a nameless middle-aged man entered a home and began to beg. The homeowner handed the man some francs, but later alerted the local authorities. The man was arrested and sentenced to 2 years' imprisonment under Article 276 and 463 of the Code Penal. When the beggar appealed his case to a German court in Aachen, less than a dozen miles away, the justices reviewing the case had two questions. Why was a man sentenced after a law established by Emperor Napoleon in 1810? And what in God's name is neutral Moresnet? The history of Moresnet begins at the end and loops back, as the case of the beggar lands in the hands of one of Aachen's justices, who then begins an investigation into the case of neutral Moresnet. His findings take us back to its origin, its rise and its subsequent fall, ending once again with the beggar. Neutral Moresnet came into existence through negotiations between the United Kingdom of the Netherlands and the state of Prussia at the Congress of Vienna in 1815. At the time, the territory had about 250 inhabitants, but for some reason, the status of the territory had been contested. Moresnet was home to a large zinc mine, at the time privately owned by Napoleon. The only other similar zinc mining operation in Europe was in Bristol in the United Kingdom. The issue of the territory, however, was not over owning the zinc, because neither the Netherlands nor Prussia ended up in control of neutral Moresnet. Instead, it was about supplying sizable brass industry that had begun popping up in the then Prussian city of Stolberg, not too far away from Moresnet. This brass industry, which was in its infancy, relied on the zinc, as brass is an alloy of copper and zinc. When the Napoleonic War ended in 1815 and trade normalized, Stolberg's factories began to bleed red, as they were outcompeted by the cheaper British brassware. A few years before the end of the war, the factories of Stolberg had signed a contract with a mine in Moresnet, which was at the time known as La Calamine for the ore that they extracted there. When territory negotiations began, lobbyists on behalf of terrified industrialists petitioned Chancellor Hardenberg of Prussia to intervene, as any territorial changes may terminate the contract and leave 10,000 people jobless. Hardenberg instructed his negotiators to sign a provisional agreement with the Netherlands in 1816, one that would pave the way towards further negotiations later on. The agreement ensured that Stolberg's contract would remain intact in perpetuity. The agreement established joint administration with little thought to the actual specifics of it. From then on, Hardenberg instructed all his subordinates to carry on as if ownership of the mine had never been a point of contention. Anyone displeased with this were to remain quiet. This left Moresnet a neutral territory, one without courts or its own rule of law. Instead, the existing laws were kept intact, and would be kept intact for 99 years, until the German invasion on the first day of war in 1914. In 1837, the zinc mine was acquired by the French company Société de Vieille Montagne, who continued to extract ore and sell it to Stolberg. I'm very sorry about that pronunciation. The territory of neutral Moresnet prospered at this time. In 1856, at the peak of mining operations, the Prussian government sent a geographer to investigate life in the territory. What he found was a prosperous society with a school, churches, a well-funded police force, a well-funded bureaucracy, and what seemed like public housing and subsidized bakeries. All of this was paid for either directly by the Vieille Montagne company, or through Moresnet's taxes, of which Vieille Montagne was, of course, the largest benefactor. The policeman who greeted the geographer was on company payroll. The taxman who juggled numbers and ensured the policeman was paid was on company payroll. What the geographer saw was the company school, the company bakery, the company churches, and the company private security. The territory was a country without a state, but it was governed by a single private enterprise. This stuff would have been Ayn Rand's wet dream. This prosperity would not last forever, though. The invisible hand of the market is fickle and cares little for humanity, and so when the zinc mine ran dry in 1884 and the company looked towards greener pastures in Britain, Sweden, and elsewhere in Germany, the territory of Moresnet fell into squalor. With no central government to handle the duties that the Vieille Montagne Company had taken upon itself, the territory was left only with an underfunded volunteer police force and no industry or wealth creation to speak of. Due to its border with 3 countries and its mountainous and forested terrain, the territory became attractive to smugglers who smuggled goods such as tobacco and coffee. It also became an attractive haven for criminals who could rely on its lackluster police force not catching them, and even if it did, they would be allowed to choose to be sentenced in a German or a Belgian court, so you could choose whichever one would be favorable to your case. Still, it would be under the century-old laws of Napoleon, though. In 1907, as Belgium banned roulette tables, the mayor of neutral Moresnet weighed offers from Belgian businessmen to open up casinos and turn Moresnet into a casino country in the style of Monte Carlo. When German police caught wind of this, they intervened, causing much Belgian outrage. 7 years later, it was not German police who illegally crossed into Moresnet, but the army of the German Empire. So there you have it, an absolutely strange story of a neutral country without a state, governed by private enterprise that turns into this wild west for capitalism and eventually collapses as there's no more resources for the company that manages it and governs it to extract from the territory, and its citizens are left in the dust. It's an extremely fascinating case. And since history is something we're meant to learn from, I think there's a few things we can learn. So then what were the lessons that we could learn from neutral Moresnet? I can think of a few, but they're rooted in my worldview and my way of looking at things. And because of that, I think mine might be different from yours. So I'd love to hear yours. Other than that, I would just like to say thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, let me know. And beyond that, special thank you to these wonderful people for supporting me on Patreon.